Gents, let's move on to the US men's national team. A big summer, as we've said time and time again. Nations League, friendlies, Gold Cup, World Cup qualifiers coming up at the very end of the summer. We had the good, the bad, and I'd say the very ugly against Switzerland in that 2-1 friendly defeat. US were missing a couple of key players, obviously Pulisic, Zach Steffen, Tyler Adams, who were missing through being in the Champions League or struggling with injuries a little bit. But I'm just a little bit worried about where the situation's going. What the main areas of concern for me and the centre-back position, we've talked about it before, gents. Just it's kind of John Brooks and then who else wants to play there at the moment? No one's really taken that chance. Andy, I know you watched it closely for PST. What were your thoughts on the game overall against Switzerland? Because there were some good points, especially in the first half, weren't there?
Yeah. By the way, Aaron Long rupturing his Achilles, really bad timing, and just misfortune for the national team because he kind of had almost solidified himself as someone who was a good natural partner and had established a rapport with Brooks, who is a very good defender at this point and has developed well, but was, I think, found out for incredibly slow on the turn against Switzerland in that game. The issue with the U.S. in that game was that as they pressed higher and higher up the field, they gave Switzerland some problems and they gave them training exercises to work out of. And they did a good job with it. That's not to say that it was lazy pressing, that they weren't applying pressure in the right way, that they weren't, moving in unison. They did all of those things and it looked pretty good. It was looking effective for the first 20 or 30 minutes of the game. But inevitably, Switzerland, a team of that quality, had an answer. They worked out what the U.S. was doing. They began to play through it, and then essentially they played through it with no issue through the second half of the game. The issue to me was that there was no adjustment from the U.S. at that point. Once Switzerland had figured that out, they didn't say, okay, well, let's drop the lines back just a little bit because they're playing through us and it's just open season on the four defenders back there. And it was just chance after chance after chance. So if you look at friendlies simply as an exercise to work on something specifically, you can look at that game and say, okay, well, Greg Berhalter just wanted to work on the press in the midfield and the forward line. Results not really mattering. They are what they are. We will accept a defeat in a game like this to work on this one specific thing that we think is going to be important in the future. That's possible. I don't know if he's willing to do that with a game, knowing just how everything is looked at and combed through and analyzed. So from different perspectives, I think you can be positive and negative coming out of this game. But like you say, Joe, Tyler Adams, the absence, that fixes a lot of problems for this team in that game specifically. It makes the press better. It makes the defensive cover better. It makes the transition of play forward better and quicker. Just everything that was missing in that game, Tyler Adams brings when he's fit and available.
Nick, I was going to move on to that point because the main issue for me, Andy, when I watched the second half very closely tactically, was that there was no plan B. The centre-backs were exposed. We know that under Greg Berhalter, all his teams at Columbus and elsewhere, he likes to have the fullbacks tuck in and play as midfielders. So Switzerland figured out we can get in behind Reggie Cannon and Dest at fullback. And the centre-backs, I don't think, have the pace to be able to cover for that. So that was a real issue. It was very direct, playing it right in behind the fullbacks, and the US had no answer and no plan B. So Nick, we know we're going to get Pulisic back. Steffen in goal, which I think is an upgrade on Ethan Horvath, I think, but he played pretty well. And then Tyler Adams, like Andy said, fixes a lot of problems. But is there, I think Honduras, right, coming up in the Nations League is going to be a very good litmus test for where the US is at and how likely they are to qualify for the World Cup, because it's not a given, is it? And I think that tactical battle and flexibility, we're going to have to see a lot of that over this summer period to see how far the USA have progressed.
Yes. Listen, I think the one thing that the addition of the Nations League in all the different confederations has challenged is getting a feel for your team. And I honestly would attribute a lot of this to Switzerland being very, very good and comparing it to, listen, I know these guys go back to their clubs, but when they've been in the red, white, and blue of the United States, it's been B teams for Wales and Northern Ireland and a lot of CONCACAF. And even when they got Ecuador and Chile, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, it was their B teams. And I think it's an uptick in class. Now the question is hunger. And I don't think that's anything going back to the Olympic failure, which I know a lot of people heard us talk about. We talked about the hunger being an issue. We talked about the players' sort of desperation, complacency, all those things. This is not going to be that. Greg Berhalter knows that he can get a trophy in like a week, right? All these guys can put a little bit of the World Cup qualifying failure behind them, just a little bit, by performing over the next 2 games. And I think Honduras, I'm going to go as far as to say I don't think they have a shot. I think it would take a red card or a couple of injuries for them to take out the U.S. And then it's Mexico, and for maybe the first of 4 times this year. And I'm really looking forward to that. I am actually looking past Honduras because I know Berhalter won't let them. And there's just too much on this team for them to not find a way to win. There's no laurels to rest on.
Yeah, for the Nations League finals, of course, the USA plays Honduras and Denver. And then we'll play, if they win, the winner of Mexico, Costa Rica. And then if they don't, it'll be a 3rd place match against the loser of the other semifinals. So they're going to get a couple of games. They're playing a friendly as well. And the Gold Cup will be a totally different roster, mostly of MLS players later in the summer in July, which again brings me to sort of my next point. I want to say and ask you, Andy, because I feel like, you know, you're going to be there maybe in Kansas City watching these games and group stage games. And what would be a good summer for the USA? Winning the Gold Cup, do they have to do that? Does it matter to win the Nations League? Or is it all about, once we get to World Cup qualifying, being set and being ready, and then making sure they start off on fire and have one foot in the 2022 World Cup? Because for me, that's all about that. Yeah. And the other competitions don't matter whatsoever.
Yeah, whatsoever is slightly harsh, but it's, you know, it's a 95, 5 kind of situation. It is obviously all building to the start of World Cup qualifying in September, and so I'm going to prioritize the Nations League semifinal and then final, knowing that it's going to be the players, it's going to be the A team from the U.S. and all the players that have just finished their club seasons as well. And so I do think Greg Berhalter is handling that correctly, making sure that these players ahead of the start of another club season with a lot of international games that's going to be jammed into that period as well, because these are not going to be just 2-game windows for a lot of the 2021 to 22 season. There's going to be a lot of 3-game international windows, which is a lot more ask and travel and demand on the players, making sure that they have a full month off before they return to their clubs and start the new season. So I want to see them do what Nick is talking about with Honduras. I want to see them dominate a good CONCACAF opponent. That to me would be, I think, the most promising sign, or the best sign of progress for this team under Greg Berhalter is, we know what it looked like last time when when the U.S. men's national team played against the top competition from CONCACAF in the Gold Cup and in World Cup qualifying. What's it look like now? And before we get to that point, to have an idea, I think, to try out a few different things, to figure out the midfield, hopefully get Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams some minutes to get there's a lot of things that on paper we think that we've figured out, but we're yet to see, I guess, come to fruition tangibly in real life. And so just getting some of those partnerships, working on that, it's small things at this point. The talent's there, the player pool's there, we know who they are, we've identified them, we've called them all up, we've done everything. It's now just about making it work on the field.
And I'm a little bit concerned, though. The talent's there, we know that. But I think, as Nick rightly brought up, they played against B teams from Wales, Northern Ireland, Jamaica, Panama, and hammered them. It's been great for confidence. But we saw Switzerland was the best team they played in a long, long time. And they could have lost that game 4-5-1 quite easily. So my big question mark around these young, very talented players is sort of their game management. How naive are they? Can they battle through the elements in CONCACAF World Cup qualifying and the Gold Cup and really grow up over the summer? That's what I'm looking forward to see. If they can, there's not many experienced players there when you look through the roster. Like John Brooks stands out. Yedlin was in this squad, but apart from those two guys, there's not a lot of caps on this roster. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that this summer.
Yeah, even for those players that have done it now at the big clubs, because we spent all season talking about that, they've done it at big clubs in big leagues in front of no one. And so the fact you bring up the rigors of CONCACAF and knowing what those away games are like, they're going to be a little less prepared for something like that because, say, Serginho Dest has not played El Clasico at the Bernabeu. He has not been through he has not been through the fire in that way. And so while they're doing it at a higher level, it's not the full experience, I guess. And so they don't bring that full experience into the national team. So there's still going to be, now that you bring that up, Joe, a bit of a learning curve in that respect.
Definitely. And Nick, I wanted to finish with an article that I wrote on PST this week about US men's national team players, and mostly in Europe, but which ones need a move this summer, a transfer. I'm looking at, guys who maybe aren't playing as much as they would like, or in Josh Sargent's case, and got relegated from the Bundesliga. Are there any guys there that really stick out to you that you'd really like to see get big transfers this summer? Because there's a lot of talent, but some US players, aren't on great teams in some of the top leagues in Europe, and you'd like to see them flourish elsewhere, right?
Yeah, Sargent is, I don't want to say it's where it begins and ends for me, but I just want to see him again. We talked last week about how he had produced in terms of the advanced numbers as much as anybody on Bremen. So I'd like to see him in a place where he doesn't have to do all the work, where his job isn't, hey, go just press, hope it works out. And when we do get the ball, be your redheaded menace, right? Like, be that guy who just gets stuck in. So I'd like to see him playing a little bit more than like a defensive midfielder at center forward. So he's a big one for me. There are a couple, I don't mean to go off the page here because I know you're asking about European players. There are a couple MLS players I'd like to see make the move, not to spoil Andy's domestic summer, but I want to see Gianluca Busio go somewhere.
Yeah.
He looks great. He looks so good. I don't know that I've watched him and thought he did poorly at any point in his young career. So I'd like to see him move. And frankly, I know it's not going to happen, but I'd love to see Walker Zimmerman somewhere else as well. I think he's done all he could possibly do in MLS, and he's become a good ball mover for Nashville. So those are two names from MLS that I'd like to see take a big shot somewhere.
Oh yeah, Busio's free kick the other day was absolutely ridiculous, and I'm just going to chuck a few other names into the kind of the hat. I think Zach Steffen is a big summer for him. He's proven he can be a backup. He's not going to start over Edison at Man City. So he was great on loan at Fortuna Dusseldorf. I think now's the time for a mid-level Premier League team. If they're looking,
Pep going to let him, Joe? Is Pep going to let him? That's what I want to know. Because I think he likes him.
He does. And if he's happy to play that role in the League Cup and play 10 to 12 games a season, that's great. But I'm not sure if he really will continue to develop at this age by not playing week in, week out. And I think he'll gain more from playing 38 games or 36 games in the Premier League season for, I don't know, chucking names out, a Crystal Palace or a Southampton or a team that needs a new goalkeeper in the middle there. And Andy, any other players that really stand out for you?
I'd even say as high as a West Ham for Zach Steffen. I think he could fit in at that level and go into a European competition and not look out of place whatsoever based on the small-ish. I mean, it wasn't small sample size. We saw 2 or 3 games in a row from him for City this season when Ederson was out. So he's put together a little bit more of a body of work than I think probably a lot of young players coming over into Europe from the U.S. typically do. Chris Richards is a big one for me this summer. He got the loan to Hoffenheim and looked pretty good and definitely progressed playing as a regular or a semi-ish regular starter in the Bundesliga. I don't think he's going to break into the Bayern Munich team at the start of next season, so it's probably another loan for him. So it's about finding, again, a good landing spot for him to go and continue that development. Maybe back to Hoffenheim. I mean, that wouldn't be the worst situation.
Leipzig, maybe. I mean, they're losing Konate
Okay.
and Upamecano to Bayern, and then the Jesse Marsch connection. I think maybe that could be a perfect fit.
I'm sold. No, that would probably be really good in terms of the style that's played there for what the U.S. men's national team is trying to do. You would probably learn a lot of pretty good lessons there, and obviously a big step up though in competition. It should be said. Anthony Robinson maybe away from Fulham, given the fact that they've been relegated. We don't know who the left back who really is the left back for the U.S. men's national team. Is it Serginho Dest playing inverted, moving from the right to the left? Is it Robinson? he wasn't exactly set up to succeed. I don't think not many were at Fulham this season, and it was just a difficult situation. Anytime you get relegated, it's going to be a difficult season. So I'd like to see him maybe get a move to somewhere with a little bit of stability. But there's not a ton of great fullbacks out there at the moment, and so there could be a landing spot for him. But I'm with Nick. It's about getting, I think, some more of these young players from MLS over to Europe, because there is a ton of talent. It's going to be on showcase at the Gold Cup this summer. I think that's probably going to be maybe a launching point for a handful of players. They're already on European radars, but having the opportunity to do it in a competition and just show that they're that next cut above might kind of trigger a few more players moving overseas, hopefully.
And I think with the pandemic and the financial situations for a lot of clubs across the world, but in Europe in particular, they're looking at markets where they can snap up some young talents for pretty decent transfer fees compared to, buying within the Premier League. You're going to be paying a premium. So yeah, a lot of young American talents, especially after the likes of Pulisic, obviously Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, how well they've done in recent years. And two names I mentioned there, I want to finish with those guys. Pulisic, I think he stays at Chelsea because people loves him, but I'm not sure, how often is he going to start, because he has such an impact off the bench. Is he okay with being an impact player? That's interesting, especially considering if Chelsea are going to make a lot of moves from an attacking point of view in the summer. They're linked to Adama Traore, Lukaku, a few others. So, that's an interesting situation to watch. And Weston McKennie, obviously, Andrea Pirlo loved him, was always talking him up. He's out. Max Allegri's in at Juve. You never know. He might not be his cup of tea. It's always difficult for young players to establish themselves when a new manager comes in. And Brian Reynolds at Roma, obviously Jose Mourinho coming in, not exactly the best promoter of young talents the football world has ever seen. But I'm sure it's going to be a big summer for the US men's national team, both on the international stage when they're playing in all these tournaments, and for a lot of these players. I hope we're going to see a lot of them move around Europe and find better landing spots where, quite frankly, lads, they just have to play. They have to play often, regularly. And even if that's at lower teams in some of the top 5 divisions, they're going to develop better by playing regular minutes. So, yeah, a big summer coming up for the US men's national team. Big summer coming up for us, lads, on Pro Soccer Talk at NBCSports.com. Transfer news, analysis, reaction, and all these big tournaments. We'll have you covered. So, Nick and Andy, thanks for joining me from stateside. And thanks everyone else for joining us. And we'll speak to you throughout the summer months. Even though the Premier League season's over, we are far from done. We'll have you covered on absolutely everything you need. Speak to you all soon, and cheers for joining us.